This story begins in the early morning hours of June 22, 1941. I was a member of the 5th Company, 2nd Battalion, 525th Infantry Regiment, 298th Infantry Division, German Army. For several weeks now we have been camped by the Bug River in the town of Frubiso. It was a formidable force, and we all knew what we were here for. The Russians knew it too. They deployed on the other side of the river and kept an eye on us. At 4 o'clock in the morning, I was suddenly awakened by movement in our tent. The soldiers said that the commander had ordered our unit to assemble in the open area where our formation training was taking place. In formation, we proceeded there. We made very little noise for such a large mass of people, partly because we were angry at being pulled out of bed so early, but more from the anticipation of the news we had all been waiting for. The commander stepped into the center of the group and announced that it was time to start moving eastward into Russian territory. I, like everyone else, had been looking forward to this day, but when I heard these words, I froze in place. I cast a quick glance at the soldier standing next to me, but he did not take his eyes off our commander. His face was impassive, but I knew what he was thinking. There was a lot of hard work ahead of us. Russia's territory is vast and her army is huge, but we all believed in ourselves and were ready to begin. Our division quickly deployed for battle. We were quite experienced and well prepared, as evidenced by how methodically we prepared our weapons and went to our positions. Soon the order came, and the silence of the newly dawned dawn was broken by the sound of the first bursts. I stood motionless and looked carefully to the east, where the barrels of our guns were pointing. The wheels spun, and an adventure began from which there was no turning back. The artillery bombardment lasted about half an hour. All this time, we hardly spoke at all. When the guns fell silent, there was quite a long pause, and then the order came that it was our turn. We rushed across the Bug to the town of Ustilag on the east bank of the river. Russian troops were there, and we were to attack them. We advanced rapidly across the fields toward the enemy positions and alerted the enemy of our arrival with a hail of bullets. As the expected resistance did not follow, the pace of our advance quickened. We found no Russian artillery here, which would have been assigned the task of opposing our advance, but only isolated defensive positions. Russian soldiers were fleeing en masse from their deployments in their underwear. Many were shot on the run, and many more surrendered as prisoners. The fact that we took the city practically without a fight confirmed the effectiveness of our artillery fire. The battle was over quickly. We had accomplished our task. My division captured the first prisoners, and I, together with other comrades from our battalion, led the prisoners back across the Bug to the camp we had prepared for them in advance, as we were confident of success. As we approached the river, we were first fired upon by the Russian soldiers who had taken refuge in the wooded area. Although the firefight quickly ceased, our company suffered its first casualties of the war. Fortunately, after a short counterattack, we managed to rescue 6 wounded soldiers and carry them to safety to our camp on the west bank of the Bug near the town of Frubiso. In Rubiso, the units of our division regrouped, but we did not stay there long. We put our equipment and weapons in order, turned around and set off across the river again, making a rush deep into Russian territory. The next town on our way, just a few kilometers east of Ostilag, was Vladimir Volensky. Before we rushed to storm the city, the offensive in this time began with a heavy artillery bombardment. That day we suffered more losses, because this time we were not able to take the Russians by surprise as easily. But even though the number of dead and wounded increased, we still captured the city without much difficulty. The war started well, but we knew that we had much grander tasks ahead of us, in particular the capture of the capital of Ukraine, Kiev. This would require much greater forces. Before Kiev, we had a long way to go to the east. On the way, we encountered no significant resistance, as the Russians quickly retreated to create a defensive line near Kiev. We marched to the outskirts of the city, and for the next 6 days we prepared for the coming battle. Just before the order came to advance on the city, we received replenishment to replace our dead and wounded soldiers, as well as additional weapons and ammunition. The German army formed a ring around the capital of the Ukrainian SSR to cut off the Russian troops inside the city and lock them there before the battle. Our division began the attack on Kiev from the north, through the city of Borispol. As soon as Kiev was surrounded, we began to destroy the Russian defenses with continuous artillery fire and then rushed into the city. The division commander identified a radio station as an important objective of the first stage of the offensive, and the order to seize this object was given to our battalion. We coped with the task and captured the radio station. Soon the German troops defeated the enemy, and the defense of the city fell. Kiev was ours. In August, the division received a new order. We were to go from Kiev to the city of Poltava. Before executing it, our company was given 5 days of rest from fighting to get in order. During the rest, the commander announced the casualty figures, which were very high. We had lost 6 non-commissioned officers, a field officer, and 18 soldiers. Several men were wounded. The number of personnel in the company was reduced from 180 to 123 men. The division commander prepared casualty figures for the entire 298th Division. In his report, he indicated that the division needed replenishment of personnel, weapons, and equipment. The last words in the report were, "As soon as the division regains its fighting strength, it should move on." In general, we knew that things were not entirely smooth. The 5 days given to us after the victory at Kiev passed very quickly. We received a new order to move in the direction of the city of Balaklia, located 120 kilometers southeast of the city of Kharkov. On the way, we made a stop and camped in the town of Chugiv on the Seversky Donets River. There we took positions on December 11 and 12, 1941. This town served as the place of the last frontier in case of our retreat, if it was necessary. On December 12, we received a new order. Now we were to move instead of the previous direction to the town of Izyum, which lay south of Balaklia on the Seversky Donets River. We left immediately. A few days later, we entered Izyum and found that the Russian troops had been there before us, but then left there. It was evident how thoroughly the Russians had plundered the town. Meeting no resistance, we stationed ourselves here for the Christmas holidays. On December 24, during the Christmas celebration, the bells were drowned in the bursts of artillery fire. The Russians tried to take us by surprise and break through our positions. They shelled the city all night, but were unable to dislodge us from our positions. Our defenses in the city held out and the Russians eventually retreated. On December 28, the 3rd Battalion replaced our 2nd Battalion in the positions, and we got a chance to rest from the fighting. The 3rd Battalion remained in Izyum with the task of holding the city, and we were allowed to move westward to the territory held by German troops for rest and regrouping. We marched a few kilometers west along the river to the village of Petrovskoy, where we had to stop for a short rest. More than anything else in the world, we dreamed of washing. Both ourselves and our uniforms were dirty. After a life in the trenches and skirmishes with the enemy, we all suffered from being covered with countless lice. Wherever you reached out your hand, everywhere, with a clenched fist, you could catch a few of these insects. To our misfortune, no sooner had we given our belongings to the cleaners than we were ordered to pack up again and start moving. The Russians were threatening to break through our defenses of the town of Izyum. Our battalion moved westward, away from the town. By January 13, 1942, the Russians had amassed huge masses of soldiers and tanks just outside the town. They were breaking through our positions, and their tanks were overcoming the barrage of our artillery. We had no strength to hold them back, so we surrendered Izyum to the Russians and withdrew. Our troops rolled back behind the Seversky Donets River. This was the first retreat for us during that war. We turned south to retreat through Barvinkovo to the town of Pavlograd. The last battle with the Russian troops was heavy and brought the entire division to the brink of existence. The commanders designated the city center as the assembly point for the 298th Division, and the anxious soldiers rushed to the main square to the appointed place. We were assigned in groups to companies and battalions. The respite between battles was very short. We did not have time to understand anything, as we were again turned around and forced to make a return march of 20 kilometers towards Barvinkov, where the front line was at that moment. After we regained the front line in Barvinkov, we were surprised to learn that the 2nd Battalion had been transferred to the Romanian division. We chuckled to ourselves when we saw the Romanians. Their headdresses looked very funny, but still they were fighting on our side, and we tried to behave as politely as possible. Our battalion commander's name was Kurt Schill. He was respected by his subordinates as a brave commander and a good tactician. His past was also interesting. In September 1939, during the Polish campaign, he was a non-commissioned officer. There he demonstrated good skills as a tactician and commander. In 1942, he was recalled to Berlin where he was awarded the Knight's Cross with oak leaves and promoted to captain. We were proud to serve with him. The reshuffling of our tasks began again. The 2nd Battalion was taken from the Romanian division and replaced with another from the former division. We were replenished, and the number of personnel in our company grew from 41 to 120 soldiers. Now we were ready to go into battle again. Our new task was to provide cover for our reconnaissance teams as they crossed the front line and went deeper into Russian-occupied territory to return with intelligence. The scouts were sent to observe the movements of Russian troops deep inside their territory and to find out if fresh units were being sent across the Seversky Donets River. By that time, we knew that one of the German tank groups was advancing on the city of Kharkov from the north, and the second was moving there from the south. We were beginning to form a ring around Kharkov, preventing the Russians from moving reserves there. The blockade ring around Kharkov was closed by May 15, 1942. On our section of the front, the situation was very calm because in the Romanian sector, on our right, the entire 525th Regiment was taking positions. We oriented our positions in relation to the Romanians and busied ourselves with the equipment of massive bunkers. The bunkers were built in groups according to the instructions of the commander in that section of the defense, who inspected the work. Their dimensions were to be 3 by 5 meters, with a depth of 2 meters 80 centimeters. On top were laid railroad rails, which we removed from the railroad tracks running through the area. The rails were laid crosswise on top of the bunker, and 2 men could fire from there. The floor was also equipped from sections of railroad rails. Its thickness was up to 90 centimeters. The bunkers had to be well camouflaged to prevent the enemy from detecting them. The entrance to the bunker was located to the side opposite the front line. We started digging trenches by hand with railroad picks, but the ground was so hard that after spending a lot of time on the work, we managed to forge only a few kilograms of soil. We worked long and hard to accomplish the task at hand, and this hard work was practically fruitless, but we did not slacken our pace. The battalion commander rushed back and forth along the trenches where we were digging and reminded us of what every soldier on the Eastern Front had been taught. Any resistance can be broken. Finally, we were able to develop a new method. We dug holes 30 centimeters in circumference. Then we take 6 hand grenades each, tie them together, and stick them in the hole. Then we take a detonation cord 10 meters long. After 3 seconds, the cord was set on fire. The charges exploded, and the explosion loosened the ground. The soldiers didn't hesitate to dive into the mud. Shovels and picks flashed through the air, and the trench grew deeper. Meter by meter, we dug into the ground and built our fortifications. On May 19, 1942, after the work on the bunkers was finished, we were again returned to the Romanians. Together with them, on May 20, we began the offensive on Kharkov. At 5 o'clock in the morning, we began to prepare for the assault, while the Romanian artillery held back the Russian infantry. She showed herself well during the Russian campaign and earned our respect. At the same time, the infantry of the Romanian army turned out to be absolutely worthless. Everyone knows that the Romanians are nothing more than a nation of gypsies and bastard children. The artillery fired on the city for half an hour. At about 6:30, the shelling stopped. I leaned out of the bunker to get a good starting position and spread out on the ground waiting for the signal to attack. When the signal sounded, I quickly jumped to my feet and, along with a wave of German and Romanian soldiers, ran across the open fields toward the town. At first, we shouted something addressed to the enemy, but after a few hundred meters of running, we discovered that it was still almost 2 kilometers to the town. As we approached, we could hear the bullets fired by the defenders in the town whistling past our ears. Grenade fragments whipped across our cheeks, but we continued to run through the fields unstoppable and fearless. My goal was 4 kilometers from the center of the city. The run under enemy fire was long and dangerous, but I, together with my battalion, reached the town. I ran to some two-story building and ducked into this shelter to regain my breath. Several of my comrades followed me. When I looked down, I found that the sleeve of my left arm at the elbow was wet with blood. Ignoring this, I readied my weapon, looked around at the soldiers of our battalion, and signaled to move on through the streets of the city. The battle lasted about 7 hours, after which our enemy's guns fell silent. Ours had the upper hand and the town was captured. Almost immediately, we began to prepare to repel the enemy's counterattack. We took up defensive positions in the town and waited, but no counterattack followed. This allowed our orderlies to clear the battlefield of the dead and wounded. The casualties in my company were small. We had 4 killed and 11 wounded. That being said, the wounds of 5 were severe and the other 6 had lighter wounds. 2 of the lightly wounded remained in their units. A little later in the day, the silence was broken. Blue smoke appeared to the left of the 1st Battalion's positions. This meant that the attacking tanks were moving there. The 1st Battalion moved back a couple of kilometers toward the former front line and at an angle to it, to use it as cover and avoid further losses in the battle that had begun. Our battalion commander was a wise man. He himself was in the forward units. He gave orders to keep calm and let the Russian tanks cut in deeper. When the Russians approached the assigned area, the Romanian artillery opened fire on the advancing vehicles. We saw 5 of them immediately engulfed in flames. The rest turned around and ran away. After that, nothing was heard from the Russians for some time.